think there's a reason why a lot of people don't like to pray in public. It's because everyone's judging your prayers. And I have heard some prayers that people said that made me cringe. And I'm going to show you a prayer from the Old Testament that when I read it makes me cringe, and God actually respected it. Let's lean in. All right, Matthew, Book of Job. When you read the Bible, scholars will tell us this is actually the oldest book that was ever written. It was even before Genesis. Now, obviously, it didn't happen before Genesis,
Right.
But specifically speaking about when the book was penned, this is the oldest book in the Bible. So I love the book of Job, but I don't want to assume everybody knows who Job is. Is it Job or Job?
Yeah.
It's spelled J-O-B. You need a J-O-B, but
Yep.
this is Job. Why don't you give us a quick backstory before we look at some of the crazy, wild things
Right.
that Job prayed? Give us the backstory on Job.
Gosh, I love Job as well. The first couple chapters and the last couple chapters are just so good.
Gold.
Now, the chapters in the middle, those are rough for me to get through when I read them. I remember reading through the Bible for the first time in a year, and I hated Job, like 5 through 38, basically. It was just like, oh, when is this going to be over? It seems so, I was like, I can't understand any of this. It was so hard to read. But the story of Job is so important. And I think it's interesting that it is one of what most people think is the earliest written book in the Bible because of what it's about. It's about suffering. It's about somebody who seems to be good and righteous and a man of God going through really hard stuff. And that's something we can all relate to, right?
Yeah.
And that's what it was for Job. Job is a righteous man. The Bible calls him that. The book of Job talks about how he was seen as like God's man on the earth. And so Satan approaches God and says, I think the only reason Job is like that for you is because of how much you blessed him.
Mm-hmm.
And so Satan says, you know what? If you will let me, I'm going to show you that Job's actually a fraud, that he's fake, that he's not actually a true man of God. He just likes all the good stuff you've done for him. And so God says, all right, bet. All right, no, that's a loose translation. He says, all right, let's see it. Let's see it. And so Satan goes and does horrible things. I'm talking about all of his family dead.
And God allows it.
Yep. All of his family dead. All of his possessions destroyed and stolen and taken. His health gone. There's a point where Job in Job 5 says, I wish I was dead. Like he says, the phrasing that's like one of those like, wait, what did he say? Is he says, I wish I would just have expired out of my mother's womb, because like that's how bad it is for him. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Job's been through it. It's not pretty, not good for Job. Yet he prays some prayers in the middle, like you said at the beginning, that are like, what
Yeah.
in the world?
You actually said God allowed all of Job's family to be killed. Actually, that's not true, because Job's wife lived.
That is true.
And
That is
then
true.
Job says,
That is
God,
true.
why didn't you take her?
Yeah.
Because now
I'm telling you, he prayed some big prayers. I'm like, wait, what?
Job's wife calls him out and says, why don't you just curse God and die?
Yep.
And so now the only living family member he has left is now trying to push him towards turning back
Right.
on God. Now, you think about losing everything. Think about going through that based on what Job chapter 1 says, that he was an upright and honest and God-fearing man. That will make you start to say things to God.
Yep.
That will make you get real serious. And Job in this book does an incredible job, impossible job of walking the thin line between honoring God and knowing who he's talking to and getting real nitty gritty with how he's
Yep.
feeling, and using some language that I bet if the majority of us heard someone pray in a public setting, we would be like,
Yep. Yep.
ooh, dude, this guy is getting ready to get struck down right now. Like, back up away. I've never heard anybody talk about God like this. I mean, one of the examples, it is all through. You got to read this book.
Yeah.
It's all through it. In Job chapter 6, Like he's had some friends tell him, you're wrong, you're not doing the right thing. His wife has told him, God has forsaken you, you might as well turn on. Lost everything. And in Job chapter 6, we see one of the prayers, one of the interactions that we have with God. Listen to what the Bible says. If my misery could be weighed and my troubles put on the scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. Like that's how bad my life is. And then it starts to get spicy in verse 3. This is why I spoke impulsively. That's why he's like, God, you want to know why I called you out? You want to know why I let my feelings get a little bit raw? You want to know why I said some things that other people, it makes them blush?
Right.
Here's the deal, God. Like I'm struggling right now. Hey man, like there's some things that are happening that are causing me to ask some questions. And I'm really trying to figure this out. And chapter by chapter, I mean, it just keeps compounding on how Job's life, and all throughout the book, it starts getting hotter and hotter.
Right.
And Job's language gets more and more. And it leads up to this point in 41 and 42, chapter 41 and 42, where God actually answers him. Like God listens to Job, and Job says some spicy stuff. He gets some hot takes, not safe for work, is what Job says in these chapters.
Yeah.
And then finally, God shows up and speaks directly to Job. And it's some of those famous quotes that he says, some of the questions that God begins to ask Job. What are some of those?
I love, those are my favorite verses where he goes, dress for action like a man and I will question you. And you're like, wait, God is saying that to this guy? Like,
yep.
What? That's just wild.
You better gird your loins, bro.
I mean, that's what he says. He's like, you better get ready because it's about to be big. And he goes, were you there when I created the world? Were you there when I laid the foundation? Were you there? It's like, he's like going back to the beginning of time. It's like, man, you don't know anything.
Yep.
You need to be a little bit more like, tone it down a little bit. You need to calm down. You need to think a little bit more about who you're talking to because I've got this.
Yep.
I've got it figured out. And it at the very end, I think it's Job 42. Job's like, oh yeah. Like my bad. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what we needed. That's what he needed was somebody to say that to him.
Yep. God talks about the Leviathan. You know about the Leviathan, Job? You know, the beast in the sea? No, you don't.
Yeah.
There's a lot you don't know. You know who does know about that? I do. You know who created those things? So God lists this long list of here's things that you don't know about, things that you don't know about, that you don't do, that you had no idea even existed. And I know about them because I made them. And just starts to pile it on to Job. But my favorite part, not only is the response of Job, does he respond to God with great humility, but we read at the end of the book of Job that despite all of those things that Job said, despite all of those emotions that he showed, at the end of the book, the Bible says God looked at Job and did not find any fault in him. And I think that's a lesson for us to learn because there's a way that you can be honest with God. You can honor God and hold him at high esteem and revere him. But God is not afraid of your questions. God is not afraid of your emotions. God is not going to be bullied or intimidated by anything that you feel or say. And so I don't know where you are in your prayer life, but I know there's some people that have been through some stuff. I know there's been times in my life where I wanted to grab God by the collar and say, hey, you and I need to talk. I feel like there's some explaining that you need to do. Now, if you can find a way to honor God and still be completely transparent in your emotions, I think that's what caused God to look back and say, I respect that. There's nothing wrong with that. So feel the feelings. Go through the emotions. God's not scared of that. He's not intimidated by that at all. In your prayers, honor God. Understand who he is, how much he knows, and how great he is, that he should inspire awe in your heart every day in your prayers. But if you can transition from that, I'm telling you, God is big enough to handle what you're going through. He's big enough to take your questions, and he will answer them because he's good, because he loves you, because he cares. Here's what Job got right. He took all his emotions and all of his thoughts and all his feelings, and he brought them to God. That's what God is looking for in you and I today. When you lean in today, bring it all to God. Honor him and respect him. Submit to him as the authority and the Lord of your life. And then feel free to lay it all out on the table. God can handle it. God knows, and God will answer.